Good morning, afternoon and evening all. This is Yorkie with episode 1 of Blast from the Past, a web series where basically we take a look at all the classic content from F1 2013. So we're going to start episode 1 with the oldest car in the game, which is a 1976 Ferrari 312 T2. Which of course also features in the latest F1 movie, Rush, and I think that's why it's actually in the game, because obviously it's all 80s and 90s content that is actually in the game at the moment. However, this is a car from the 70s. So yeah, I think an exclusive feature to coincide with the Rush film, and of course this was driven by Niki Lauda. And a little bit about the car itself first. It had a flat 12 engine, which produced 510 brake horsepower. It's very similar to the 312T. The only real difference is the airbox was taken from the top of the car, basically to coincide with aerodynamic rules for that year. So the air intakes are actually, as you can see there, at the front, just in front of the cockpit, which basically feed air down into each cylinder bank. And yeah, this is the car that Niki Lauda actually had his unfortunate crash in at the Nürburgring, which led him to getting severely burnt. However, he made a recovery and was actually back in the car within 6 weeks, and unfortunately for Lauda, he actually missed out on the World Championship, the Drivers' World Championship that year, by a single point. Prior to the crash, he did have a relatively comfortable margin over James Hunt. He had a couple of races, obviously, to his name, but obviously in that time that Lauda was out and recovering, James Hunt managed to catch up and overtake him, and yeah, win the championship by 1 point, which is pretty epic, to be honest. The crash was actually suspected to be a rear suspension failure that caused it, and it did originally have a D-Dion rear suspension arrangement, but it was abandoned after extensive testing, and when they changed it to a more conventional setup. But yeah, they kept this car from 1977 as well, and it won the Drivers' World Championship then. Niki Lauda won it in this car again. So yeah, it featured in both 1976 and 1977, and we're basically going to take a look at it in game and just talk about how the car actually feels, and you know, the look, the sound, and what I actually think about the car and all that sort of stuff. So we're just going to park up here on the grid, just cruise up to this spot here, basically take a look at a couple of camera angles, so you can see all the suspension and intricacies at the back there. Looking from the side, it actually looks like something out of McLaren's tuned animation series. It's really quite short and relatively tall. It's quite a weird looking car compared to what we're used to nowadays with the F1 2013 cars. It's more modern looking, as the front wing kind of sits on the nose rather than underneath it. But yeah, it's quite a nice looking car. It's got some interesting shapes, definitely say that. Whether I think it's an absolutely stunning and gorgeous car, I can't really say. Probably if I looked at it, or if I was around at the time, which I wasn't, obviously. My dad was, he was relatively young as well around then, so yeah, it was probably quite a revolutionary design back then, and apparently it had a very simple aerodynamic structure to it. It was very, you know, very flowing sort of curve. There wasn't anything drastic, which basically just allowed it for easy mechanical changes here and there. So they made their improvements through that line of car performance. But actually driving the car in game, obviously it sounds really quite nice. Quite like the dial on the front. You got the little rev light there as well. But as for the actual handling itself, it's good. It's a solid feeling car. The The rear end can step out like it does just there in the traction zones. However, the majority of it, it's relatively planted. It's got a decent amount of downforce. You can turn the car in and you can be nice and smooth with it. It's yeah, it's just a very good solid introduction to basically the classic cars. So we're just skipping to Brands Hatch now, which is actually the track that this car actually debuted on back in 1976. It wasn't a championship race track. It was just it was basically a non-championship race at the Brands Hatch Racial Championship Champions. Sorry. And yeah, its first actual championship race was at the Spanish Grand Prix. So I'm kind of mainly just sitting in this view and driving this car around, basically looking to see if it will produce any sparks. Something that a lot of the classic cars actually do is just constantly spark up, and the F1 2013 cars do as well when you run them rather low to the ground. I am using a completely standard setup for all this, so that's probably one factor as to why there is no sparks. Usually down here the car is completely compressing down into the ground. Sparks are absolutely flying everywhere, but that's not the case this time round. In this car, neither does it spit any flames, but yeah, it's still a very nice car, and it's a great way to really get used to the F1 2013 handling model, and also used to the classic cars themselves, just because it's relatively, yeah, it's smooth, it's easily manageable, and it just basically you can learn all the simple intricacies of basically throttle management and brakes. So we're going to push for a relatively quick lap time at Imola here. It's a track that I know very well, and yeah, having played around in the car a little bit, I basically wanted to see what I could do. So taking that first chicane pretty aggressively, running the curves, getting a little bit of oversteer in the second corner. As we come into this one, shifting down one gear, shifting down another. As we come into the right-hander, taking those two corners beautifully. As we now come into the hairpin, keeping the revs high, short shifting ever so slightly out the exit, and basically just trying to get that traction down. We use the full width of the track as well, and we come down into this left turner, turning in a little bit too early, so I had to come back out of that one, and we come down into this one. It can actually brake really late, as it did just there. Getting that corner hooked up quite nicely as we come now to the chicane. It's actually a little bit deceiving, but it hooked that one up quite nicely, even though we get a bit of a slide on the exit. But catch that nicely with a little bit of counter steer. And we come now into basically the final sector. That corner not too bad. That one balancing the throttle, using the curb on the exit, hooking up that one up nicely. And for some reason changing the view into this team cam as we come across the final chicane, hooking that up beautifully as well, and setting a 127.950. So I'm probably going to end up using Imola as basically the benchmark for fast testing the other tracks. Basically just driving around, getting used to the car. But yeah, it's a nice car, and it's definitely one to take out onto the track if you just basically want to get used to driving almost like very much a bare bones sort of car, and get used to the handling model with throttle management and brakes, and basically trying to, you know, counter that that low traction that the F1 2013 engine seems to have. But yes, that was going to conclude episode 1. Next week we are going to look at the 1980s Williams, so please hang around for that. But if you've driven this Ferrari yourself, I'd love to hear what you think of the car. Please leave those in the comments below, give the video a rating, and of course don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for more content in the future. I shall hopefully see you soon, guys. Take care.